This is Beyond the Call, Medal of Honor Stories from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by Trackpads.com. In this episode, we follow First Lieutenant Harry Linn Martin of the United States Marine Corps, an engineer officer from Bucyrus, Ohio, whose final night on Iwo Jima turned a rear area camp into a last-ditch defensive line. His story is not just about courage under fire. It is about quiet responsibility, carried all the way from a Midwestern childhood to one of the hardest-fought islands in the Pacific. Before we continue, I want to mention the Medal of Honor book series that accompanies this work. These books tell the stories of America's Medal of Honor recipients in a serious, readable, and historically grounded format, with each volume focused on a specific campaign, battle, or part of the war. They are available in color paperback, Kindle ebook, and matching audiobook editions. You can find them at militaryauthor.me. Harry Linn Martin grew up in Bucyrus, a small Ohio town where the railroad tracks, schools, and churches framed everyday life. Born in 1911, he belonged to a generation that watched the memory of the First World War fade into the background while new dangers rose overseas. As a teenager, he joined the Ohio National Guard, learning early how to take orders, care for equipment, and work as part of a team. After graduating from Bucyrus High School, he went on to Michigan State College, studying business administration and throwing himself into college athletics. At Michigan State, he played football, wrestled, and spent time on the ski slopes when winter allowed. Friends and classmates did not remember him as a showy star, but as someone who could be counted on to do the hard work in practice and take hits without complaint. He also joined the cavalry unit of the Reserve Officers Training Corps. In those peacetime years, horses and sabers looked old-fashioned, but the training gave him experience in leading men, reading ground, and making decisions when others were looking to him for direction. After graduating in 1936, Martin left the Midwest and headed west and across the water to Honolulu, Hawaii. There he worked as an office manager for a construction company that specialized in tunneling. The job demanded attention to schedules, materials, and people, all skills that would later translate into his military role. At that time, though, the Hawaiian Islands were a distant, scenic duty station, not yet the forward edge of a growing Pacific conflict. He was a civilian professional with a stable career and every reason to believe his life would follow a normal, peaceful arc. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the entry of the United States into the Second World War changed that picture. By 1943, Martin was in his early 30s, older than many of the new recruits crowding into training camps, but he chose to put on a uniform again. On August 25, 1943, he accepted a commission as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps Reserve. Training at Quantico in Virginia introduced him to the culture and expectations of Marine officers, and further schooling at the Engineer School in New River, North Carolina, prepared him for a specialized role, that of an engineer officer. In March 1944, he completed his engineer training and joined the Engineer Regiment of the 5th Marine Division, soon to be organized in part as the 5th Pioneer Battalion. Pioneers were combat engineers. They built roads and supply points, cleared obstacles, and dug fortifications, often under fire and always close enough to the front to feel its pressure. Martin was assigned to Company C, where his job combined technical knowledge with the leadership of men who worked with picks, shovels, explosives, and bulldozers in the middle of battle. The 5th Marine Division trained hard in Hawaii, rehearsing amphibious landings and beach assaults on terrain chosen to resemble upcoming objectives. One name loomed over their preparations: Iwo Jima. The small volcanic island sat in a critical position between American bomber bases in the Marianas and the Japanese home islands. Its airfields made it a valuable base and emergency landing site. Japanese forces had spent months turning Iwo Jima into a fortress, with interlocking caves, bunkers, and firing positions carved into the rock. Everyone understood that taking it would be difficult and bloody. On February 19, 1945, the long-anticipated assault began. Harry Martin went ashore with the assault waves of the 5th Marine Division, landing on the steep, loose, black sand beaches under enemy fire. Marines struggled to move inland as artillery and machine gun fire swept the shoreline. For pioneers like Martin, the first tasks included clearing obstacles, opening routes off the beach, and establishing supply dumps where ammunition, water, and other essentials could be staged. In the course of that brutal work, he suffered a slight wound, a reminder that engineer officers on Iwo Jima were never far from danger. As the division fought its way inland, yard by yard, the 5th Pioneer Battalion remained close behind the rifle companies, filling craters, cutting paths, and building up positions under fire. Casualties among officers and non-commissioned officers were high, and by March 1, 1945, Martin had been promoted to first lieutenant. The island's terrain was broken and deceptive, with ravines, ridges, and cave openings that made any sense of a secure rear area more of a hope than a reality. Japanese defenders often chose to fight to the death or slip behind American lines to launch sudden night attacks. In the early morning darkness of March 26th, that threat became terrifyingly real for the men of the 5th Pioneer Battalion. In the bivouac area, Marines slept in foxholes and shallow dugouts among their tents and equipment. They were behind the front lines but still close enough to hear distant firing. Before dawn, a determined Japanese force infiltrated through the rough ground and burst into the camp. Grenades exploded among the sleeping men, gunfire flashed in the dark, and shouts of alarm cut through the night as enemy soldiers charged directly into the bivouac. First Lieutenant Harry Linn Martin was jolted awake into that chaos. Instead of seeking a sheltered spot or trying to slip away, he ran toward the heaviest firing. With only moments to act, he began pulling scattered Marines into a rough defensive line near his own foxhole. He shouted directions, positioned men where they could see and fire, and used his own weapon to help check the enemy's first rush. That quick action turned a group of isolated foxholes and startled individuals into the beginnings of a coordinated defense and stopped the initial momentum of the attack. As the fight surged around him, Martin could see that some of his men were still cut off. Isolated foxholes were being overrun or pinned down under close assault. He understood that if those pockets collapsed, the enemy would be able to roll up the makeshift line from the flanks and drive deeper into the rear area. He left the relative safety of the position he had just organized and moved across ground swept by fire to reach the threatened Marines. Under grenades and small arms fire, he rallied the survivors, passed weapons to those who needed them, and led them back toward the main line, closing dangerous gaps. During these efforts, he was wounded, and then wounded again. Despite his injuries, he refused to withdraw to the rear or accept evacuation. The battle around him remained fluid. Japanese soldiers continued to look for weak points, and in one surge they seized an abandoned machine gun position that overlooked part of the bivouac. From there, they could fire into the Marines, defenses, and into nearby units. Recognizing the danger, Martin charged the position alone, using grenades to blast the emplacement and then his pistol at close range, killing the enemy and silencing the weapon. The night fighting did not end with that action. Another enemy group anchored a fresh thrust with a strong position that threatened to split the defenders. Once more, Martin moved forward to the very front of the action, calling nearby Marines to follow as he led an assault against the new threat. In close combat, he and the men with him killed the occupants and broke up the attack. Almost immediately, he threw himself into yet another push to disrupt a larger hostile group. In the course of that final charge, an exploding grenade mortally wounded him, and he fell still leading from the front. When daylight finally revealed the scene, the bivouac of the 5th Pioneer Battalion bore the scars of the attack. Tents were torn, shell holes pocked the ground, and bodies lay where the fighting had been most intense. The Japanese raiding force, however, had failed in its mission to overrun the rear area and ripple destruction through neighboring positions. As officers collected reports, it became clear how central Harry Martin's actions had been. The line he had thrown together in the first moments had stopped the attack from crashing through, unopposed. The men he had rallied and led back into the defense had filled holes that might have turned into fatal breaches. The enemy positions he had personally attacked and destroyed were not sideshows. They were key firing points that could have dominated the bivouac and enfiladed surrounding defenses. By eliminating them, often while armed only with a pistol and grenades and already carrying wounds, Martin blunted the sharpest edges of the assault. In effect, he turned a rear area engineer camp into a functioning defensive perimeter and held the door closed at a moment when it could easily have been torn open. In the months that followed, as the war moved on and attention shifted to other battles, the Marine Corps gathered eyewitness statements and formal reports from Iwo Jima. Those accounts formed the basis for First Lieutenant Harry Linn Martin's posthumous Medal of Honor. The citation describes how he repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to organize defenses, rescue isolated Marines, and attack positions threatening his men. It emphasizes that he continued to lead after sustaining multiple wounds and that he died while charging yet another hostile group, with his actions credited for saving many lives and preserving the integrity of the battalion's rear area. Harry Linn Martin was laid to rest after the war, and his name joined the long list of Americans who did not return from the Pacific. In Bucyrus, in the Marine Corps, and among students of military history, he is remembered as more than a figure in a citation. He stands as an example of an officer whose sense of duty did not end at his job description. He was an engineer officer, trained to build and support, who, in the crisis of a night attack, became the anchor of a defense that might otherwise have collapsed. His story on Iwo Jima shows how one person's refusal to abandon others, expressed in a series of split-second choices in the dark, can change the outcome far beyond the circle of a single foxhole.